I did not flinch. I did not set down my wine glass too hard. I did not let my voice rise even half a note. I just looked at my son-in-law across that table, his smug little smile, his hand resting on my daughter's forearm like she was a thing he owned. And I thought, you have no idea what you've just done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this actually started, because the birthday dinner was not the beginning. It was just the moment I stopped being patient. My daughter's name is Lee. She is 34 years old, and she has her father's eyes, steady, warm, the kind that don't miss much. Her father passed 11 years ago, a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in February, and I raised Lee on my own after that. Not entirely on my own. We had each other, which is something. She finished her degree at Western, got a job she was proud of with a firm in London, Ontario, the kind of firm where she wore blazers to work and called clients by their first names and came home on Fridays talking about cases the way her father used to talk about his research. I was proud of her in a way I don't have the right words for. The kind of proud that sits behind your sternum and just stays there. She met Ryan at a colleague's housewarming party. This was 3 years ago, the autumn before everything changed. I remember she called me on the drive home. She always called me when she was driving, said it kept her awake on the 401. And her voice had that particular quality, that slightly breathless, slightly embarrassed quality, that meant she was trying not to sound too excited. "He's in finance," she said. "He's very funny. He asked for my number." I asked the usual things. How old? Where from? What was his family like? She didn't know yet, she said. She'd just met the man. I told her that was fine. There was time for all of that. And I meant it. I genuinely meant it. Ryan was 37. He'd grown up in Mississauga, gone to McMaster, worked for one of the mid-size investment firms downtown. He dressed well. He shook my hand the first time we met and looked me in the eye, which I noticed, because I always notice things like that. He brought a bottle of Ontario Red to dinner at my house. A good one, not showy, just good. And he asked about my career in a way that seemed genuinely curious rather than polite. I was a family court judge, retired now, but I sat on the bench for 22 years. I've interviewed hundreds of people. I know the difference between someone performing interest and someone actually listening. Ryan listened. That first dinner, at least. They moved in together after 8 months. This was faster than I would have chosen, but I'm not the one choosing. Lee was 31. She had a job. She had judgment, or so I believed. I kept my opinions to myself. I'd seen enough in my courtroom to know that a mother voicing doubts too early can push a daughter closer to exactly the wrong person, and so I watched, and I waited, and I told myself there was nothing to wait for, that I was looking for problems that weren't there. His sister's name is Courtney. She's 4 years younger than Ryan, divorced, lives in Oakville, and a house her ex-husband is still largely paying for. She has opinions, strong ones, about everything: how a kitchen should be organized, what a woman should prioritize, what marriage means, what a wife should look like. She visited every few weeks in those early months, and each time she left I could feel Lee recalibrating, quieter, a little more careful. I noticed, but I said nothing. Not yet. The first thing I actually noticed, the first thing I can point to now and say, that was it, that was the beginning, was a Sunday afternoon about 5 months after they moved in. I'd driven up to London to have lunch with Lee. Ryan was supposed to be at a squash game. We were going to go to that little Ethiopian place she loved on King Street, the one with the injera that her father would have eaten 3 baskets of given half the chance. I got to the apartment and Ryan was there. The squash game had been canceled or rescheduled or something. I didn't ask. He was in the kitchen when I arrived, and Lee was standing at the counter already dressed for lunch, and there was this small moment, so small I almost missed it, where she looked at him before she said hello to me. Just a flicker, a checking. like she needed to confirm it was allowed. We didn't go to the Ethiopian place. Ryan said he didn't feel like Ethiopian, so we went to a pub on Richmond he preferred. It was fine. The food was fine. Ryan was charming. He was funny. He ordered for all three of us, which he framed as efficiency and which I framed privately as something else entirely. When we left, I hugged my daughter in the parking lot and she held on a second longer than usual. I drove home on the 401 and tried to tell myself I was reading too much into things. 6 months later, Lee stopped contributing to her RRSP. I only knew because we had always talked openly about money. Her father and I had believed in that and teaching her to understand her finances, and she mentioned it offhandedly, that she'd paused her contributions for a bit, that she and Ryan were restructuring things. I asked what restructuring meant. She said Ryan felt it made more sense for them to pool finances into a joint account that he managed since he worked in finance and understood it better. I want to be careful here because I know that financial arrangements vary between couples and none of them are automatically wrong. But I had spent 22 years on the family court bench. I had seen how quickly pooled finances under one person's management could become a closed door. And I knew my daughter. I knew that Lee had started her own TFSA at 23, that she read the Money Sense articles I forwarded her, that she had always known exactly where every dollar of hers was going. So I asked her gently whether she felt comfortable with the arrangement. She said yes. She said it made sense. She said Ryan was really good at this stuff. Her voice had a particular flatness when she said it, the kind of flatness that isn't peace, the kind that's built from practice. I said that was fine, and I changed the subject, and I drove home that night, and I sat in my kitchen for a long time with the lights off. Ryan's comments started small, they always do, in my experience. A remark about the way Lee dressed for a work function, not cruel. Just redirecting that color isn't your best, is it? A suggestion that she didn't need to have coffee with her colleagues on Fridays after work because they'd have more time together in the evenings. An observation made pleasantly at my dinner table one Easter that Lee sometimes had trouble thinking through things logically under pressure, that it was just how she was wired, that it was actually quite endearing. Lee laughed when he said it, a short, agreeable laugh. Then she looked down at her plate. I looked at Ryan. He smiled at me over the table, relaxed, sure of himself. Courtney was there that Easter. She nodded when Ryan said it. She just needs someone to help her focus, Courtney said. Some women are like that. She said it like she was complimenting them both, like this was simply the arrangement they'd arrived at, sensible and kind. I said something about needing more wine, and I went to the kitchen and stood at the counter for 30 seconds with my hands flat on the cold granite. Leigh was not a woman who needed help focusing. Lee had graduated in the top 8% of her class. Lee had argued a case before a panel of senior partners at 28 years old and won. Lee had sat with her father in the hospital for 4 days without sleeping and still managed every single practical thing that needed managing, because she understood that love sometimes requires you to hold yourself together even when you don't want to. She did not need someone to help her focus. What she needed was for her mother to stop being polite. But I wasn't ready yet, not quite. The change in her happened the way these things always happen, gradually and then all at once. By the second year, she had stopped mentioning work the way she used to. She still had the job, still wore the blazers, but when I asked about cases, she would give me short answers and move on. She'd stopped having her Friday coffees. She texted me less, and when she did, the texts were lighter somehow, more surface, like she was sending me postcards rather than letters. She stopped telling me when things were difficult. I am her mother. I have known her for 34 years. I knew. There was one afternoon, October, the year before her birthday dinner, leaves coming down on my street in that soft way they do in October, when she called me and she sounded like herself for almost 40 minutes. We talked about a book she'd been reading. We talked about a news story. She laughed a real laugh about something her coworker had said. And then I heard the front door in the background, and her voice changed in a single breath. Not dramatically, just it moved, like a curtain dropping. "Ryan's home," she said. "I should go." She was gone before I could answer. I went for a walk after that, long one, through the neighborhood, past the school where I used to bring her on weekends, past the park where her father taught her to ride a bike in about 40 minutes flat because he was both patient and completely unwilling to let her give up. I walked for an hour, and I thought about what I knew and what I could prove and what I should do. I am a retired family court judge. I know the difference between a feeling and evidence. I know that what I was observing was a pattern, isolation, financial control, the slow erosion of someone's sense of their own competence. But I also know that a woman in the middle of it rarely sees it from the outside. She sees small things, reasonable explanations, a man who loves her, who is sometimes difficult, who has high standards. She doesn't see the shape of it yet. I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic, just dates and things I observed and things Lee said or didn't say. I wrote them in a small notebook I kept in my bedside drawer. I've spent a career understanding that documentation matters, that feelings are valid, but records are what you can use. Her 34th birthday was on a Saturday in March. She wanted a dinner, a nice one, at the Italian place in downtown London that had been there for 30 years and had the kind of menu that doesn't need to be trendy because it never stopped being good. She'd booked it herself, which surprised me a little, actually. It felt like an act of assertion. I am having a dinner for my birthday, and these are the people coming. The people were me, Ryan, Courtney, and Lee's closest friend from university, a woman named Petra who now lived in Ottawa and had taken the train down for the weekend. I liked Petra. I had always liked Petra. She was the kind of friend who tells you the truth. We were seated at a round table near the window. The evening was going carefully, that particular careful quality of an occasion where people are on their best behavior because they know it matters. Lee looked beautiful. She'd bought a new dress, dark green, and her hair was down. And for the first 2 hours, she laughed at things and told a long story about a case she was working on. And I thought, there she is. I thought, she's still there. We were looking at the dessert menu when it happened. Leigh was deciding between two things. I can't remember exactly what, a tiramisu and something with poached pears, and she was reading the menu aloud, just lightly, the way you do when you're deciding, saying the descriptions out loud to hear how they sounded. And Ryan reached over, took the menu from her hand, looked at it for about 5 seconds and said, "You want the tiramisu. The other one has alcohol in the poaching liquid and you don't actually like pear." He wasn't angry when he said it. He wasn't harsh. He said it in a pleasant, informational voice, like he was simply clarifying a fact. Lee said, "I know, I was just." "You overthink menus," he said. "It's fine. It's endearing." He looked around the table with that particular easy smile. "This is just how she is. This is just how we are." Courtney laughed, a short, light laugh. "She's always been like that," she said, as if she'd known Lee for years rather than 2. "Some women just need someone to help them decide." Petra did not laugh. I did not laugh. I looked at my daughter. Lee had the expression I'd been seeing for 2 years, that careful, agreeable, closed expression. She picked up her fork and looked at her water glass. Something in her had gone somewhere else. Just briefly, the way a light goes behind glass. I set my napkin on the table. I said, "Would anyone like coffee?" I asked it pleasantly. I asked it in the voice I use when I'm making a decision. Then I excused myself and walked to the restroom. In 22 years on the family court bench, I sat across from a great many people who believed they were safe because no one had stopped them yet. They had learned to read the room, to perform reasonableness, to use a pleasant voice and a plausible explanation. They were very often charming. They were very often well-dressed and articulate and entirely sure that the women in their lives could be managed. I made 2 phone calls from that restroom. The first was to a colleague, a woman I'd worked with for 15 years who now worked in family law and private practice. The second was to my financial advisor to ask a question I'd been turning over for months. Both calls were short. Both calls confirmed what I needed to know. I washed my hands and looked at myself in the mirror, and I went back to the table. Dessert arrived. We finished the evening the way you finish an evening when you're playing a long game, politely, without drama. Ryan paid the bill because Ryan always paid the bill, which was one of the things I had written in my notebook. Petra hugged me for a long time when we said goodbye in the parking lot, and when I held her at arm's length, the look on her face was the same look I'd been carrying for 2 years. She knew. She just hadn't known what to do either. I drove home and I opened my notebook and I kept writing. The following weeks were careful ones. I didn't say anything to Lee, not yet, not directly, but I started doing the things I should have done sooner. I called her at odd hours, the hours when Ryan was at work, and I let her talk without asking too many questions. I listened for what was in the pauses. I asked her once, carefully, how she was feeling about the financial arrangement they had, whether she felt she had access to her own money, whether there was anything in her name. She went quiet for a moment and then said everything was fine. It was organized. Ryan handled it. I asked if she had any savings in her own name. Longer pause. There's the joint account, she said. I didn't push. Not that day. I just said, okay, I love you. And I let it go, and I wrote it down. Through my former colleague, I was able to get Lee connected, gently, indirectly, with a financial counselor who specialized in exactly this situation. A woman who had helped dozens of people in exactly this kind of arrangement understand what they actually had and what they were entitled to and what their options were. I didn't tell Lee it was my idea. I simply passed along the name as someone a friend recommended, left it with her, and waited. It took 3 weeks. Then Lee called me on a Thursday evening and she said, "Mom, I made an appointment with that woman you mentioned." I said, "Good. How are you feeling?" She said, "I don't know yet." That was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 2 years. The appointment led to a second appointment. The financial counselor helped Lee understand what her actual situation was, that the joint account Ryan managed contained almost entirely her salary, that his contributions had been minimal and intermittent for over a year, that she had no independent savings vehicle in her name and had not had one for nearly 18 months. This was not information Lee had had. She had believed they were building something together. She had not understood that she was, in practice, the only one building. I kept my voice steady when she told me. I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to talk to someone, a proper someone." I said, "I know exactly who to call." Through my colleague in family law, Lee was connected with a lawyer who specialized in separation and asset recovery. I did not push her toward any particular outcome. That was not my place. My place was to make sure she had the right people around her, the right information, the right support, and then to step back and let her be a 34-year-old woman who was capable of making her own decisions, even the hardest ones. She made them, slowly, and then with the certainty that I recognized from when she was a girl, that Lee certainty, the one that comes when she's done thinking and has arrived somewhere solid. She moved her direct deposit to a new personal account. She met with the lawyer twice. She had a conversation with Petra over the phone that lasted 2 hours and that I'm sure I'll never hear the full details of, and that's exactly as it should be. She told Ryan she was leaving on a Sunday morning in May. I was in the car 20 minutes away, parked on a side street, available but not present. She had asked me to be there but not in the room. I understand that too. She called me 45 minutes later. Her voice was shaking, but it was her voice. The full one, the real one, the one I hadn't heard at a table in a restaurant in 2 years. "It's done," she said. "Can you come?" Ryan was gone by the end of June. The legal process was what it was. Not uncomplicated, not quick, but manageable. He contested nothing significant in the end. Perhaps because his lawyer advised him not to. Perhaps because he understood that the woman sitting across the table from him had a mother who had spent 22 years on the family court bench and knew every mechanism available and had documented everything she'd observed since October 3 years ago. I don't know exactly what he understood. I know what I saw. Courtney sent Lee a message in July. Something about how she hoped Lee understood what she was giving up. How Ryan had only ever wanted what was best for her. How some women didn't know a good thing. Lee read it to me over the phone and then said, "I'm not going to respond to that." I said, "No, I don't think you should." She blocked the number. Petra came back from Ottawa in August for a long weekend. They went to the Ethiopian place on King Street, the one with the injera, the one Lee had wanted to go to 2 years earlier, on that Sunday afternoon when I'd shown up for lunch and everything had quietly rearranged itself. Leigh sent me a picture from the table. 2 women, laughing, completely full of food, a basket of injera between them. I kept it. I look at it sometimes. Lee is doing well. She reinstated her RRSP contributions in September. She called her financial advisor herself, didn't need me to prompt her. She's been back in the Blazers, back talking about cases on the phone on Friday afternoons. Last month, she called me from the drive home and her voice had that slightly breathless quality again. Not about a man, just about a case she'd argued and won, and how the client had cried in the hallway afterward, and how Lee had held herself together until she got to her car and then cried too. A little. "Is that okay?" she asked. "That I cried after?" "Of course it's okay," I said. "It means you understood what it meant to them." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thanks, Mum, for everything, for the whole thing." I said, "That's what I'm here for." I meant it the same way I always have, which is completely and without condition and for as long as I'm here to mean it. When people ask me, and sometimes they do, colleagues, old friends, women I know from the years when Lee was growing up, when they ask me how I handled it, how I stayed patient, how I didn't intervene sooner or more dramatically, I tell them the same thing. I tell them that the most important thing I understood after all those years on the bench is that you cannot make this decision for someone else. You cannot reach in and retrieve a person from a situation they haven't yet found the edge of. What you can do is make sure the door is unlocked. Make sure they know where it is. Make sure that when they're ready to walk through it, there's someone standing on the other side. I stood on the other side. That was my job. And when she was ready, she walked through. I've thought a lot about the word patient since all of this settled. People use it like it's a virtue that costs nothing. But patience, when you're watching someone you love disappear one small decision at a time, is one of the harder things I've ever practiced. It cost me something every single week for 2 years. What I kept coming back to through all of it was something I understood from the bench long before I understood it as a mother. Actions accumulate. Every small thing Ryan did, taking the menu, managing the account, redirecting her laugh, scheduling her silence, none of it was nothing. Each one landed somewhere in Lee, and over time they changed the shape of how she moved through a room. That's not bad luck. That's cause and effect playing out slowly enough that it looks like personality, like a relationship finding its rhythm. It isn't. It's just consequence wearing a patient face. And the same is true the other way. Every small thing I did, writing in that notebook, answering the phone at odd hours, passing along a name without pressure, sitting parked on a side street 20 minutes away, those accumulated too. They didn't look like much from the outside, but they were there, and they held. What I wish I could tell the version of myself standing at my kitchen counter with the lights off in the early months is this: integrity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quietest thing in the room. It's writing down what you saw because you trust that what you observed was real, even when you can't prove it yet. It's refusing to let the story you're being handed replace the one you actually know. Ryan was very good at offering a story, charming, organized, generous with the bill. But I had 22 years of sitting across from people who offered stories, and I had learned to read what was underneath them. That knowledge was not something I'd gone looking for. It had built itself slowly, through attention and honesty and an unwillingness to be fooled by a pleasant voice. It turned out to matter more than I would have expected, in a kitchen, at a family table, in a restroom at an Italian restaurant in March. Lay had it too. The capacity for that kind of clear-eyed understanding. It didn't disappear. It went somewhere quiet for a while, the way things do when someone keeps telling you that your own judgment can't be trusted. But it was there. It came back. The afternoon she called the financial counselor herself, without me prompting her. That was Lee. That was her mind working the way it had always worked, once she had enough room to work in. The thing about resilience is that people talk about it like it's a quality you either have or you don't. I don't think that's true. I think it's something you access when the right conditions exist. Lee needed to understand what her situation actually was before she could act on it. Once she understood it clearly, she moved, carefully, intelligently, without drama, without doubt. That's not something I gave her. That was already hers. I kept the photograph she sent from the restaurant in August, the one with Petra, the full basket of injera, both of them laughing. I look at it and I think about all of it, the 2 years, the notebook, the parking spot on the side street, and I think that the best thing I ever did was not the phone calls in the restroom. It was staying, showing up, not letting the silence between us grow so wide that she couldn't find her way back across it. What city are you listening from? And if you've ever watched someone you love go quiet in a way that didn't feel right, what did you do?